projects we're playing around with in the shed is Wifey's VZ Commodore. This is a car we bought as a going concern. It's got an LSX 427 in it. Really lots of good gear, big brakes, and it had a twin turbo set up on it. So we run that for a little while. It ran a 10.3, but mostly hovered around the 10.7 mark. We drove it to the track, air conditioned, cruise control, the whole lot. So it's a pretty cool car. But this is the twin turbo setup on the car. It had spaghetti everywhere. They were low mount turbos, so it made a heap of heat in the engine bay. And we just sort of struggled trying to keep the car super consistent. They're 50mm AVO turbos, had nice low down power, and it was quite a cool deal, but just not really as consistent as we wanted it to be. So we'll do a couple of videos in the next few months. We're changing to like a killer boost exhaust manifolds, so they're quite a nice deal. Plug leads will be heaps easier to get to, and yeah, it's going to be single 88mm turbo, so that's going to mount in this big gap here, and then we're going to have to try and get an exhaust down in through the back there, and we're going to have to make some intercooler piping, and so yeah, we'll do a little video on that, and then when we get the car going again, we'll see if we can beat the 10.3, and most of all, we'll get the car more consistent. Okay, we've pushed that ute off the hoist, and now we're playing around with some things in the rear end here. Fiddling around with some bits and pieces, but this is where it all happens as far as the adjustments we talk about on the car. So we'll just go through roughly the 3 or 4 main things that we adjust in the car, and the first is the anti-roll bar, and we just run that pretty neutral. We don't have any load on it, but how that works is it just keeps the diff square in the back of the car. If you see some cars that don't have an anti-roll bar, you'll find this wheel will tuck right up into the guard and it will hike the left-hand front of the car. That's the natural inertia of the engine. Wants to pick that left-hand wheel up, and what this anti-roll bar does is keep the diff square on the track and stops it from shoving that tyre up into the guard. So we're just running that neutral at the moment, and it's working well. It lifts both wheels quite evenly. So that's a pretty important thing to have in a car once you start making over 800 or 900 horsepower or anywhere up around there. This keeps the car nice and efficient. And then there's the 4 link bars here, and this is the main. We run this top bar pretty straight, but this is the bar. We started off down here a little bit, and we've worked our way up a couple of holes. We're actually at the top hole there, and we may add an extra hole at some point. But last meeting we found the car it was starting to work pretty well, so we're pretty happy with that. And if you hear people talking about instant centers and intersect points, basically the instant center is the balance point of the car, to make it really basic and idiot proof for people like me. The instant center would say be the camshaft height of say a V8 engine, and that's about the point where it would be. And the intersect points is an imaginary line drawn from this bar and the top bar. Where those 2 bars meet or cross is your intersect point. So on a slick car you would have it long and low, so this bar would be pretty level and the top bar would be facing down, and long and low would be spindle height of the front wheel, so well below the instant center, well below that camshaft height. So that will pick the front end up, transfer weight to your slicks, and that's just basically how a slick car would work. So this is the complete opposite. We're looking to have the intersect point higher than the instant center, higher than the camshaft height, and doing the complete opposite. So these 2 bars will cross at your radio or your dashboard height, roughly. So doing the complete opposite, planting the diff into the ground, lifting the back of the car up and driving the car away down the track, and just putting all the load straight onto the tyre. So we'll try and post up a little example of the guard separation. On launch, you'll see the guard actually separates, the car doesn't wheel stand. And that's got it work. We've got it working pretty well. The other thing is the Panhard bar, or this just centres the diff in the car. Once you adjust this and get your wheels central in the back of the car, that doesn't really get fucked around with much at all. The other thing is if your car's turning left or right, we found the car turning a little bit right. So you add a little bit of preload to this top bar, like one flat this way will actually shorten the diff and effectively turn the diff up a little bit and take a little bit of drive off this tyre and add a little bit to the left-hand tyre. So right hand hook, we've got right hand steer here, so we're getting a little bit too much drive on this tyre. So we wanted to transfer a bit over to that side, so you put a flat into that, which lifts this tyre ever so slightly. If the car's turning left, you give it a flat the other way, vice versa. It helps the car track off straighter down the track. So that's a good thing about a four-link. They're very adjustable as opposed to a ladder bar. It can confuse you because there's so many holes, but you'll find 80% of these holes you'll never use. It's just a matter of getting that intersect point in the game. And this top bar here is the only other one you really fuck around with much at all. So hopefully that's confused you, because it confused me. The other thing is we've added a wheel speed sensor to the back here. So that's got magnets on it, a little magnetic pickup goes to the logger. And we were having problems with bumping the car into stage. It was starting our boost curves and our timing curves. So we were blowing the tyres off and wondering why. That's because it took us a couple of runs to work out that it was the bump box was triggering the race timer. So now, when the car gets to 5 RPM, the bump box will just, when you bump the car in, it only just shunts like that. So we got it set at 5 kilometres an hour. Then our timing curves will start. And that's what we found last meeting. The car took off real nice. So I think now we'll be able to chuck some power into it and get on with things, get after it a bit. One other thing a few people have asked about is the car's a bit smoky sometimes on the line. Well, we've got a horsepower junkie billet oil pump in here, makes pretty huge oil pressure. And we had to drill a hole in here, and that's where we adjust it from. It's got a little grub screw, and we raise and lower the oil pressure through this little window that we've tapped in there. So with the high oil pressure, we found that the oil feed to the turbo was bypassing a little bit of oil, putting it into the exhaust, and basically it's just a bit of residue oil in the exhaust. But to get over that, we fitted a little pressure regulator, that little round cylinder there is a Turbo Smart oil pressure regulator. So it only sends 40 pounds of oil pressure to the turbo now, and the other 40 or 50 pounds we were returning into the oil drain on the side of the sump here. So that line would come in and pump the extra oil, which was also coming out of the oil drain, back into the sump. As we love to spend copious amounts of money on aeroflow fittings, we just buy shit and then we change it. And so now we're now a little worried that the oil pouring back into this was actually blocking the drain. So we've now tapped it into the sump. So that extra oil that's not going to the turbo now goes straight into the sump, and it's keeping that oil drain a lot clearer. And we think from last meeting we only really got one run in, but we found a lot less smoke in the exhaust. So yeah, it's not ready to blow up or anything. It's just a little bit of residual oil while we sort out this combo. I think we might have it pretty good now. So that's all that was. No need to be alarmed. We're not running diesel or anything in the car. One other little thing is our travel limiters in the front there. It's pretty basic, just a whack a bolt in there. It replaces the bump stop, and you can adjust that up or down to limit the amount of the wheel falls out of the front of the car. So that's just a real basic, easy thing to stop the front wheels travelling too much. We've got the converter back in the car now. As you've seen from our last video, we had a 4-bolt. This is one of our other all-fast converters. But we had a 4-bolt, a 4-stand, should I say, converter in the car. The converter worked mint. It's a typical all-fast thing. It's 125, 60 foot, 160 mile an hour, so everything was working well with it. But I didn't really have the right grade bolts in the car. We only had grade 5 bolts, and this was really starting to eat into there, and we had to keep retensioning them. And being a little 6-cylinder Ford, I didn't really think too much about it. I thought it won't make enough power to beat the bolts up, but wrong. So Gonzo's hooked us up with a 6-bolt converter, which is back in the car now. So we've got a couple more bolts, we've got fine threads, grade 8 bolts, and I think that's just a good upgrade that we should never have a problem with that again. So that's all back in the car, and we're ready to really give it a hit. Probably the only other thing we've got playing around in the shed is we've got a little Commodore we bought for my daughter Casey. She's going to run this in Super Street. We'll probably run in the 11-second range. It's sort of an old skid car, but it's got pretty good bass, and LS3 Turbo 400. We've had to fix up a lot of mang things that the last owner had on it, but we've got some radials to put on the back, and she'll start running that later on this year. So that's another little car we're playing with, and we'll keep you up to date over the next week or so. Hopefully the Westernationals is good for us and we run some PBs, and we'll come down and say hi at the track.